Hey folks, God's Comic Brad Stine, another existential philosophical question for you, and it's simple. Do you believe the world would be a better place, more peaceful, more able to get along, if the world lived under atheistic principles as opposed to religious principles? Pretty simple question, but has quite a ramification. Write down below what you think would happen if atheism ruled the world. Again, if you don't know what the answer is, you can always listen to my rant first and then pretend you thought of it. You know, folks, whenever I speak with atheists, I notice a pattern of behavior that seems to be constantly at play during the dialogue. For the record, by the way, I have had some great discussions with few atheists, and I have a lot more enjoyment and get much more invigorated from speaking with people who have different opinions than I do than having people agree with me. I would much rather engage in a conversation that ends with, let me think about that, than I agree. The big problem of late I have with some atheists, though, is dependent on which school of thought they come from. There's been a newer style of atheist engagement over maybe a decade that has seemed to stem from the Richard Dawkins school of ridicule over rhetoric. For those of you on the left that may have stumbled upon this video and are still with me, I should mention that rhetoric is the art of persuasion, which along with grammar and logic is one of the three ancient arts of discourse. Yet Richard Dawkins has instigated to his atheist congregation this incredibly uncivil and self-righteous permission to not only believe only his faith in no God is true, but anyone who disagrees or behaves consistent with their firmly held beliefs are worthy of nothing but ridicule, literally. For example, when commenting on Catholic communion once, Dawkins responded, and by the way, this is his exact words after describing the Catholic ritual to his followers, was to mock them, ridicule them. Dawkins tries to insist that he ridicules people's belief and not them as a person, yet has made it very clear in many of his talks that he insists that his perspective of what he terms evidence-based thinking is the only respect-worthy approach to the world. Unapologetic about his willingness to label as ridiculous beliefs he defines as rooted in faith rather than evidence. This is an old tactic that still works for atheists who haven't been taught to be able to defend their faith instead of presume it. I'm sure some of you watching might take umbrage with my consideration of atheism as faith-based as opposed to evidence-based, so perhaps we can take a quick peek at the evidence. Atheists believe that at one time in the history of the universe, it didn't exist. Not that it was simply a conglomeration of chemicals and chaotic materials, but in fact, the universe simply didn't exist. There were no molecules, no chemicals, no heat, no material. There was literally nothing. They then believed that that absolute nothing blew up. Daniel Dennett tried to circumvent this problem by stating that the universe simply caused itself. Do you hear what one of the four horsemen of the new atheist said? The universe had to exist so that it could cause itself to exist. Incoherent? Of course. Necessary for an atheist to cope with not wanting God as an option? Yep. If you actually believe the universe existed before it existed in order to cause it to exist, you either live by faith and not facts, or you're a lunatic. Believing in God, thus, from a practical perspective, actually fits evidentially in regards to the first cause, because God would be eternal and uncaused, and thus scientifically, when he decided to create something from nothing, it was possible. That's why the Bible says, whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those that seek him. That's Hebrews 11:6. But what makes atheism actually dangerous is what happens when it's given power, as in the undergirding of a political framework. This is easily observed through Marxism. You see, left to its own devices, atheists make up a fairly small subculture worldwide. Humans from time immemorial have been religious and will always lean that direction because of two simple realities. Number one, humans are designed intrinsically to worship God, and two, God is real. Thus, our proclivities as humans to gravitate towards him or her or whatever our interpretation of God is something we simply can't help ourselves from being drawn to. We will either worship the true God or we will substitute him for a counterfeit to fill the void. The Bible would define the counterfeit as an idol, that which takes the rightful place of God. Atheism replaces God's rightful status with the worship of themselves. Atheism is a worship of all things human. It worships science, which isn't an entity but only a technique we invented to observe and draw conclusions from the natural world. Atheism worships feelings as opposed to a moral absolute to give us perspective in how to integrate ourselves with one another. Because with God, there are rules in place that never deviate. We are able to steer our ship away from the rocks if we get lost because we have a compass to reference. Atheism has no such compass and thus relies on whatever feels good and appears not to harm anyone in the process. The fact that culture will always seek ways to appease its passion means nothing to the atheist, since a disciplined life isn't expected from a highly advanced carbon-based life form. Matter of fact, the impetus for atheism to move forward is survival, and that's it. If I survive, it's good. If I don't, it's bad. That's it. That's all they have. Hedonism then becomes the reward for supposedly not getting in the way of others' desire to feel good as well. Do they have a moral obligation not to harm others or take what they have to enrich their life experience? Of course not. They try to justify it through this obscure, scientifically unprovable concept known as a social contract. That somewhere, eons ago, humans got together and made a deal that if you don't murder me, rape my wife, and steal my food, I won't do it to you either. What exactly is the modus operandi that's going to keep us in this bargain? Well, there is none. It's why humans continue to murder, rape, and steal and will never stop, because those behaviors are only objectively wrong, thus immoral, in a theistic world. A world where we will answer to the judge and jury either on this life or eternally for what we've chosen to do while on this planet. The fact God deemed those behaviors wrong is why we have laws punishing those who trespass this moral code. Atheism not only doesn't have an ultimate arbiter of our behavior, and thus the concept of justice being applied, but even more telling, in a world where survival is literally the impetus for humans to thrive, then murder, rape, and stealing is actually helpful in the race for survival. These behaviors are actually prudent and good. If evolution were true, murder simply eliminates competition for food, shelter, and companionship of the opposite sex. Rape, simply our evolutionary instinct for passing on our DNA. And stealing is simply a practical way to acquire whatever goods are necessary so as to continue the journey of staying alive. Of course, the historical reality of the slaughter of hundreds of millions of human beings in the 20th century coming at the hands of Marxist communist countries is indisputable. The fact more deaths came at the hands of atheistic governments than every religious-driven war or philosophy in all of history combined is also indisputable. I have heard atheists try to exclude themselves from this reality by stating that none of those regimes did their totalitarian evil in the name of atheism. That may be true, that Stalin didn't declare, in the name of atheism, we will destroy you. But just as the United States has a constitution that supports and justifies the perimeters by which and how the government protects the rights and liberties of its citizens, communism gives itself permission to jail, torture, murder, and exile anyone they deem not succumbing to the will of the state. That state is allowed to murder because it controls the freedom or lack thereof of its inhabitants. It answers to no transcendent moral law because atheism gives them the freedom to be their own law, and thus murder isn't immoral if it is defending the state against willful dissent. Notice also that in communist countries, religious individuals are always rounded up first and exiled because they have chosen a higher authority to worship than the state. So next time you see an atheist in print or social media or in an interview seem to be infused with anger, arrogance, and ridicule of others, especially those who believe in God, pray for them. They're simply living out unapologetically the very social code that their religion dictates. They also have believed a lie. We need to feel sorry for them. The cost of their choice to willfully cast aside God is an eternal decision, more horrific than can be imagined. If you're a Christ follower, you are commanded to do to them and for them what they will never do for you. Love them and pray they will come home. It's a thankless behavior in this life, but their Creator will be pleased you would sacrifice for the undeserving. Hey, don't forget, He did it for us first. This is God's Comic, Brad Stine. And as you well know, PC free is liberty. Hey, all my friends and fans, this is God's Comic, Brad Stine. I want to say thank you for being one of my Patreon missionaries to support this ministry. You know, I have been trying to use comedy and intellect and intelligence and philosophy to reach American culture, well, the whole world, but I'm really focused on America. You're part of that. You're part of what I call the Awakened 1,000, and that is the first 1,000 people that support this ministry on a small scale can keep it going day after day, week after week. So there's some free episodes out there. If you would do me a favor, share those with your friends, your family. And again, thank you for being already part of this. We are going to make a difference. It's already happening. We can take back our place at the table of ideas in America if we believe God is with us on our side and we do our part. I'll be here. I'll be the funny. I'll take the hits. If you just support me financially, of course, but also with your prayers and sharing it with other people. Let's see what we can do while the getting's good.